Sable had imagined this moment 1,000 times. Standing in Thornhall with the firelight catching the edges of Calder's jaw, the whole pack gathered shoulder to shoulder, the air humming with anticipation. She had imagined him turning toward her. She had imagined his voice, low and certain, saying her name. He did not say her name. Calder stood at the head of the great hall, his shoulders squared beneath the weight of his father's ceremonial cloak, and when he opened his mouth, the words that came out rearranged the architecture of Sable's entire life. I have chosen a companion to stand beside me as I lead this pack into its next chapter. His voice carried the way it always did, deep and unhurried, filling every corner of the room without effort. Renata Voss. The hall erupted. Applause, gasps, murmurs of approval rippling outward like stones dropped into still water. Sable stood in the third row, perfectly still, her hands clasped in front of her, her face arranged into an expression she hoped looked like composure. It was not composure. It was the last wall standing between her and total collapse. Renata stepped forward from the front row, her dark hair gleaming, her smile wide and triumphant as Calder took her hand. She was beautiful in the way that made other women feel like rough sketches, poised, polished, the daughter of the pack's most powerful elder, everything Sable was not. Sable watched Calder's fingers close around Renata's, watched him lift their joined hands for the pack to see. Watched the firelight dance across the sharp angles of his face while 300 wolves cheered. Her wolf howled inside her chest, a sound so raw and wretched it nearly clawed its way out of her throat. She bit down on the inside of her cheek until she tasted copper. Not here, not in front of everyone. Because Sable was not just any wolf in the crowd. She was Calder's mate. His true, fated, bond-sealed mate. And he knew it. He had known it for 11 months, ever since the night the bond had snapped into place between them with enough force to bring them both to their knees. 11 months of secret meetings in the hours before dawn. Months of his hands cradling her face, his voice low against her ear, whispering promises she had been fool enough to believe. No one can know yet, he had told her, again and again. The elders won't accept it. You're not from a founding line. Give me time. I'll find a way. She had given him time. She had given him everything. And now he stood in Thornhall, holding another woman's hand, and the time he had asked for had run out in the worst possible way. The nausea hit without warning. Sable pressed her fist against her stomach and forced herself to breathe through it. Not now. Please. Not now. But her body had stopped listening to her weeks ago, ever since the morning she had knelt over a basin in Thisbe's healing rooms and thrown up for the third day in a row. You're pregnant, Thisbe had told her, her weathered hand steady on Sable's shoulders. About 6 weeks along. 6 weeks, Calder's child, the alpha's heir growing inside a woman he had just publicly replaced. No one in this hall knew. Not Calder, not Renata. Not the 300 wolves stamping their feet and raising their voices in celebration. Only Thisbe and Sable herself and the tiny, impossible life curled beneath her ribs. Sable looked at Calder one last time. Really looked at him. His jaw was set. His posture was flawless. He did not search the crowd for her. He did not glance in her direction. He did not hesitate. And that was what broke her. Not the announcement, not Renata's gleaming smile, the fact that he did not even look for her. She turned and walked out of Thornhall. No one noticed. The cheering swallowed the sound of her footsteps, and the heavy oak doors swung shut behind her without a sound. The night air hit her face like cold water. She pressed her back against the stone wall outside and let the mask drop. Her hands were shaking, her vision blurred. A sob tore free from somewhere deep in her chest, and she clamped both hands over her mouth to muffle it. 11 months. She had wasted 11 months loving a man who had just chosen someone else while she stood in the crowd like a stranger. while his child grew inside her. She was done. Sable pulled her hands away from her face, wiped her eyes with the heels of her palms, and straightened her spine. The trembling didn't stop, but that was fine. She could shake and still move. She could fall apart and still walk. And she was going to walk. She was going to take her things, leave Ashenmore before dawn, and disappear so completely that Calder Ashworth would never find her. He had made his choice. Now she would make hers. But first, she needed to see Thisbe. Because Thisbe was the only person in the world who knew what Sable was carrying, and the only person she trusted enough to say goodbye to. She pushed off the wall and started walking, her arms wrapped around her stomach, her chin lifted against the dark. The moon was half hidden behind clouds, and the path to the healing rooms was empty. Behind her, Thornhall blazed with golden light. She could still hear the celebration, muffled now, and Calder's voice rising above it, strong and sure and utterly unaware that the most important person in his life had just walked away, and she was never coming back. 2 hours earlier, the world had still made sense. Sable had spent the afternoon in Thisbe's healing rooms, grinding dried silverleaf into a fine powder while the old healer sorted through a delivery of fresh yarrow. The air smelled of dried rosemary and wood smoke, and pale autumn light filtered through the narrow windows. "You need to tell him," Thisbe said, not looking up from the yarrow. She said it the way she said everything, calm and certain and immovable. Sable's hands stilled on the mortar. "I will." "When?" "Soon." Thisbe made a sound that conveyed with remarkable efficiency that she did not believe a single syllable of that answer. "He's announcing something tonight," Sable offered. "At the gathering. Maybe after that." She resumed grinding, pressing the pestle in careful circles. "He said he's been working on something with the elders, a political move. He wouldn't tell me what, but he said once it's done, things will change." Thisbe looked up then, her gray eyes sharp beneath heavy brows. "Change how?" "He said he'll have more power to make decisions without the council's approval." Sable paused, and despite everything, a flicker of hope lit in her chest. Maybe this is it. Maybe tonight he announces that he's restructuring the Elder Council, and then he can finally acknowledge the bond publicly. The words tasted like wishing. She knew it even as she said them. But she had been running on wishes for nearly a year, and stopping now felt like admitting that the ground beneath her had been hollow all along. Thisbe set down the yarrow. "And if it isn't that?" Sable didn't answer. She pressed the pestle harder into the bowl, the silver leaf crumbling beneath the pressure. "Child," Thisbe said, and her voice softened in a way that made Sable's throat tighten. "You are carrying the Alpha's pup. That is not a secret that keeps. Your body will make the announcement for you whether you're ready or not." "I know." Sable's voice came out smaller than she intended. "Then you know that every day you wait is a day closer to losing control of the story entirely." Thisbe crossed to her and placed a hand on Sable's arm. "Tell him tonight, before the gathering." Sable had tried. She had gone to Calder's quarters an hour before sunset, her pulse hammering, the words rehearsed and rearranged a dozen times in her head. She had walked the length of the upper corridor twice before she found the nerve to approach his door. But the guards outside had turned her away. The Alpha was preparing for the evening's announcement and was not to be disturbed. "Can you tell him Sable needs to speak with him?" she had asked. The guard's face had remained perfectly blank. "No messages, miss. Alpha's orders." She had stood in that corridor for a long moment afterward, her hand resting on her stomach, feeling the weight of everything she hadn't said pressing against the inside of her ribs. "I'll find him after," she had told herself. "After the gathering, when the crowd has gone and it's just us, I'll tell him everything." She had dressed carefully, not in anything fine because she didn't own anything fine, but she had braided her hair and put on the dark green dress Thisbe had helped her mend last winter. She had studied herself in the small mirror above the wash basin and tried to see what Calder saw when he looked at her. Tried to see someone worthy of an alpha's bond. The mirror showed her what it always showed her. Brown eyes. A jaw too stubborn for her face. Hands still stained faintly yellow from the turmeric she had been processing that morning. She looked like what she was. A healer. A worker. Nobody important. She looked presentable. She looked like someone who might stand beside an alpha, if the alpha had the courage to let her. The walk to Thornhall had been long enough for the doubt to creep in. It always crept in. Sable was a foundling, left at the pack's eastern border as an infant, raised by the communal nursery, and later by Thisbe, when it became clear she had a talent for healing work. She had no family name, no lineage, no standing. When the bond with Calder had ignited that night 11 months ago, it had felt like the universe correcting an error, like the world was finally saying, "Yes, you belong. You belong right here." Calder had felt it too. She had watched his face change when the bond hit, watched the shock and recognition, and something close to awe transform his features. "You," he had whispered, staring at her like she was the answer to a question he'd been asking his entire life. For 3 weeks, it had been perfect. Desperate and dizzying and consuming. They met in the hours between midnight and dawn. He kissed her like she was air and he had been drowning. He held her like letting go would kill him. And then the reality of who they were had settled in. "The council will never accept it," he had said one night, his forehead pressed against hers. "Renata's father controls half the elder votes. If I announce a foundling as my mate before I've consolidated power, they'll use it to challenge my authority." "So what do we do?" she had asked. "Give me time." Time. The word that had become the foundation of everything, and the excuse for nothing changing. She had given him weeks that stretched into months. She had watched from the edges of pack gatherings as he navigated the politics of the Elder Council, played the long game, smiled at the right people, said the right things. She had waited in his chambers in the dark hours before dawn, and each time he came to her, he smelled of late meetings and cold stone corridors and the particular exhaustion of a man carrying too many secrets. "Soon," he would whisper against her temple. "Soon, I promise." Sable had arrived at Thornhall that evening carrying nearly a year of patience, 6 weeks of pregnancy, and the fragile, desperate hope that tonight would be the night everything changed. She was right. Everything changed. Just not the way she'd imagined. Now, walking through the dark toward Thisbe's healing rooms, her arms wrapped around her stomach, Sable replayed his words. "I have chosen a companion to stand beside me." Companion, not mate. The word was deliberate, political, clinical. He hadn't called Renata his mate because she wasn't. Sable was. But companion was close enough to fool the pack, close enough to give Renata status and power and a place at his side, and close enough to erase Sable entirely. She reached the healing rooms and pushed through the door without knocking. Thisbe was still awake, seated by the fire with a cup of tea and a face that said she already knew. "I take it the announcement was not what you hoped," Thisbe said. Sable opened her mouth to respond. What came out was a sob. Thisbe held her while she cried. No words, no platitudes, just steady arms and the smell of dried herbs and the crackling warmth of the fire. When the sobs finally thinned into ragged, hiccuping breaths, Thisbe guided her to the chair by the hearth and pressed a cup of warm ginger water into her hands. "Drink," Thisbe ordered. "The baby needs you calm." The word baby hit Sable like a fist. She pressed her palm flat against her stomach. "I can't stay here, Thisbe." "No," the healer agreed, and the lack of argument was somehow worse than resistance. "You cannot. If the pack finds out I'm carrying his child, the elders will try to take it." "A foundling raising the alpha's heir?" Sable shook her head. "They'll claim the child and cast me out. Or worse, They'll keep me here with no rights, no say, no voice of my own. Just a vessel for the air. Thisbe's expression darkened because they both knew it was true. Pack law was ancient and unforgiving. An unbonded female carrying an alpha's pup had no legal standing. The child belonged to the pack, and the mother was an afterthought. "And if he finds out?" Sable asked, her voice cracking. "He just announced Renata before the entire pack. If I walk up to him now and say, 'Congratulations on your new companion. Also, I'm pregnant with your heir,' what happens?" "He would be forced to act," Thisbe said carefully. "Forced." Sable laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I don't want to be someone's obligation. I spent my whole life being tolerated, being the foundling that the pack kept out of duty. I won't be that for him, too." She stared into the fire. The flames blurred and sharpened as fresh tears pooled and fell. "I loved him," she whispered. "I loved him so much it rewired my entire body. Every morning I woke up, and the first thing I felt was the bond humming in my chest like a second heartbeat, and I thought, this is proof. This is proof that I matter to someone." She wiped her face with the back of her hand. "But he stood in that hall tonight and chose someone else. He looked out at 300 faces, and mine wasn't the one he was searching for." Her jaw tightened. "I won't stay for a man who hides me, and I won't let my child grow up watching their mother be a secret." Thisbe was quiet for a long moment, the firelight carving deep shadows into the lines of her face. "Where will you go?" she asked. "Coppervale, your sister's settlement, the one in the eastern hills." Sable looked at her. "You said she takes in strays." A ghost of a smile crossed Thisbe's face. "She does. She'll ask no questions and expect hard work in return." She paused. "It's 3 days on foot through the Grey March, hard terrain, especially in your condition. I'll manage. You'll need supplies, dried provisions, a warmer cloak, the tincture for your nausea." Thisbe was already rising, moving through the room with the brisk efficiency of a woman who had decided that if something was going to happen, it would happen properly. "And you'll need to leave before dawn. Once the celebration ends, Calder will dismiss the court and retire. If he reaches for the bond and senses you pulling away from the territory, he'll come looking." Sable's stomach lurched. "Can he feel that? Can he feel me through the bond at that distance?" Thisbe hesitated, her hands stilling on a jar of dried mint. "The bond between true mates is not a gentle thing, child. It's a living thread. When you leave, he'll feel it stretch. When you cross the territory border, he'll feel it pull. And if you go far enough—" She trailed off. "It'll hurt," Sable finished. "Both of you," Thisbe confirmed. "But it won't break. Only rejection or death severs a true bond." Sable closed her eyes. She could feel it right now, that golden thread in her chest, warm and steady, connecting her to a man who was probably standing in Thornhall at this very moment with Renata's hand in his, accepting the congratulations of wolves who didn't know the truth. She wanted to grab that thread and rip it out with her bare hands, but she couldn't. So she would do the next best thing. She would walk until it stretched so thin he could barely feel her, and then she would build a life on the other end of it, a life that didn't include him. Thisbe packed the bag in silence. Dried venison, hard bread, a pouch of medicinal herbs, the nausea tincture, a heavier cloak lined with rabbit fur. She worked quickly, her movements practiced, but Sable noticed the slight tremor in the old healer's hands. "You're scared for me," Sable said softly. "I'm furious for you," Thisbe corrected, her voice tight. "There's a difference." She fastened the pack and held it out. "But I'm also proud. Leaving takes more courage than staying ever did." Sable took the pack and pulled it over her shoulders. It was heavier than she expected, but the weight felt grounding. Real. A physical reminder that she was doing this. Thisbe crossed to the workbench and picked up a folded piece of parchment. "Give this to my sister." It explains your situation without details he could use to track you." Sable took the letter and tucked it inside her cloak. Then she looked at the woman who had raised her, taught her, protected her, and loved her in every way that mattered. "Thank you," she said, "for everything." Thisbe pulled her into a fierce embrace. "You listen to me," she said against Sable's hair. "You are not a foundling. You are not a secret. You are a healer, a mother, and a wolf with more spine than any alpha I've ever met. Don't you dare forget that." Sable held on for one more breath. Then she let go. She slipped out through the eastern gate while the celebration was still roaring in Thornhall. The guards were thin on this side of the grounds, most of them drawn to the main hall for the festivities. The autumn air was sharp and clean, and the gray march stretched out ahead of her, dark and vast beneath the half-hidden moon. She didn't look back. 300 wolves celebrated inside those walls. An alpha toasted his future with the wrong woman at his side. And somewhere in the eastern wing, a healing room sat empty, still smelling of ginger and goodbye. Sable walked into the dark, one hand on the strap of her pack, the other pressed against her stomach. 2 heartbeats, hers and the tiny one beneath her ribs. That was enough. That would have to be enough. She was halfway across the first ridge when the bond in her chest pulsed. A sharp, confused tug, like something had noticed her absence, like someone had reached for her in the dark and found empty air. Sable gritted her teeth and kept walking. Calder did not notice she was gone until the celebration ended. The hall had emptied slowly, wolves filtering out in clusters, voices loose with drink and satisfaction. Renata had stayed at his side the entire evening, her fingers resting on his forearm with a proprietary ease that made his skin crawl beneath the surface. He endured it the way he endured council meetings and diplomatic dinners, with a mask so practiced it had become a second face. That was the arrangement. Her father, Elder Voss, controlled the largest block of votes on the council. Without his support, Calder's proposed territorial expansion into the unclaimed Greymarch lowlands would be dead before it reached a vote. The pack needed that land. 3 harsh winters had thinned their hunting grounds to almost nothing, and the Ashenmoor wolves were going hungry. Renata was the price, a political companion, a strategic alliance dressed in ceremony and firelight. It meant nothing. He had told himself that all evening, standing in front of 300 wolves with a woman on his arm who was not his mate. It meant nothing because the only thing that meant anything was waiting for him in the quiet hours afterward. Sable. The name moved through him like a pulse, like breath. He had felt her presence in the hall earlier, a faint hum of warmth through the bond that told him she was close. He hadn't dared look for her. If he had found her face in that crowd, his composure would have cracked, and every wolf in Thornhall would have seen it. So he had kept his eyes forward. He had held Renata's hand and spoken the words and told himself this was the only way. The crowd thinned. Renata kissed his cheek, her lips lingering a fraction longer than necessary, and bid him good night with a smile that expected something he would never give her. He waited until she disappeared into the corridor before letting the mask drop. He would go to Sable tonight and explain. He would hold her face in his hands and tell her this was temporary, that Renata was a chess piece, not a replacement, that the bond between them was the only real thing in his entire life. She would understand. She always understood. Calder crossed the empty courtyard toward the eastern corridor that led to the healing rooms. His stride was long and purposeful, the ceremonial cloak abandoned on the back of his chair in Thornhall. The night air bit at his skin, but he barely felt it. All he felt was the bond, that golden thread in his chest that always pointed toward her. Except tonight, it felt different, thinner, stretched in a direction he couldn't place. The warmth was still there but muted, like hearing someone's voice from the far end of a long corridor. He frowned, slowing his pace. The bond hummed with something unfamiliar. Not warmth. Not the steady comfort he was used to. Something colder. Something that felt like distance. He reached the healing rooms and pushed the door open. The room was empty. The fire had burned down to embers. Thisbe's workbench was clean, her tools put away. No sign of Sable. No scent of her either, which was wrong. She spent half her waking hours in this room. Her scent should have been everywhere, lavender and dried chamomile and the warm undertone that was uniquely hers. But the air smelled stale, old, like she hadn't been here in hours. Calder's chest tightened. He crossed to her sleeping quarters behind the main room. The narrow bed was made, the blanket folded with the precise corners Sable always insisted on. The small shelf above it was half empty. Her cloak was gone. Her leather satchel was gone. The dried lavender she kept in a jar on the windowsill was gone. The realization hit him like a physical blow. Not the slow creep of understanding, but a sudden, violent collision between what he was seeing and what it meant. She had packed. She had taken her things. Not in haste, not in panic, but deliberately. She had chosen what to bring and what to leave, and that careful, measured quality made it worse. This wasn't a reaction. This was a decision. Sable was gone. His wolf surged forward, slamming against his ribs with a force that nearly buckled his knees. The bond in his chest flared, and now he felt it clearly. The direction. East. She was moving east, away from Ashenmoor, away from him, and she was already miles ahead. No? The word came out guttural, barely human. He turned and tore through the corridors to Thisbe's private quarters. The old healer opened her door before he reached it, as though she had been expecting him. She was fully dressed, a cup of tea in her hand, her expression arranged into something that looked almost rehearsed in its composure. "Where is she?" Calder demanded, and his voice was a sound he didn't recognize. Ragged, desperate, stripped of every layer of authority and composure he had spent years constructing. Thisbe regarded him with an expression that contained no sympathy whatsoever. "She left," Thisbe said. "I can feel that," Calder snarled, pressing his fist against his sternum where the bond was pulling like a fishhook. "Where did she go?" "That is not my information to share. She's my mate." The silence that followed those 3 words was devastating. Thisbe tilted her head slightly, and when she spoke, her voice was as calm and measured as a blade being drawn from its sheath. "Is she? Because 3 hours ago, you stood in that hall and announced another woman as your companion, in front of the entire pack, in front of her." Calder flinched. "She watched you take Renata's hand," Thisbe continued, each word placed with surgical precision. "She watched you lift it for the pack to see, and you didn't look for her. Not once." "I couldn't." His voice cracked. "If I had looked at her, everyone would have known. I couldn't risk it." Thisbe's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes hardened into something that looked very much like contempt. "You couldn't risk looking at the woman you claim to love, but you could risk breaking her heart in front of 300 witnesses." Calder's hand was still pressed against his chest. The bond was screaming now, a sharp, insistent pull that grew more painful with every passing second. "I need to find her," he said. "Thisbe, please. Whatever I've done, whatever you think of me, I need to find her. I'll fix this. I'll renounce the arrangement with Renata. I'll go before the council and tell them everything." Thisbe studied him for a long, silent moment. "You're too late," she said quietly. "You've been too late for 11 months." Calder stared at her, the words sinking in slowly, each one heavier than the last. And then, beneath the panic and the guilt and the desperate need to move, something shifted in Thisbe's expression. Not softening exactly, but something closer to sorrow, like she was watching a man walk toward a cliff he couldn't see. "There is something else," Thisbe said. Something she wanted to tell you tonight, before the gathering. The ground tilted beneath his feet. What? He whispered. She's carrying your child, Calder. The world went white. Then it went silent. Then it collapsed. He was already running. Oren found him at the eastern gate, half shifted, his claws gouging the wooden frame of the archway. Calder. The beta's voice was sharp enough to cut through the haze. Calder, stop. The alpha turned on him, and whatever Oren saw in his face made the beta take a full step backward. Calder's eyes were no longer entirely human. Gold bled through the gray, his wolf pressing so close to the surface that his features had begun to distort. His teeth were too long. His hands were wrong. She's gone, Calder rasped. Sable. She left. Oren's expression shifted from alarm to something more guarded. I know. Calder went very still. You knew. I saw her leave through the eastern gate during the celebration. Oren held up a hand before Calder could speak. I didn't stop her because I didn't know she was running. I assumed she was stepping out for air. By the time I realized she wasn't coming back, you were still in Thornhall with your hand wrapped around Renata Voss's fingers. The words landed like a backhand. Calder absorbed them without flinching, but only because he had already used up every flinch he had in Thisbe's doorway. She's pregnant, Calder said, and the word tasted like ash. Thisbe told me, Sable is carrying my child, and she left because He couldn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Oren's face said it for him. How long has she been gone? Oren asked, shifting into operational mode the way he always did when emotions threatened to swamp the situation. Hours. 3? Maybe 4. She's heading east through the Grey March. On foot? Calder nodded, his jaw clenched so tight it ached. Oren exhaled through his nose. The Grey March is rough terrain, but she's a healer, not a tracker. She'll take the valley route because it's the only path she'd know. If we send wolves now, a fast patrol could close the distance by dawn. No patrol, Calder said. Oren blinked. What? I'm not sending a hunting party after my pregnant mate like she's a fugitive. Calder's voice was low and dangerous, aimed at himself more than at Oren. She didn't run from a threat. She ran from me. I did this? Calder, you can't go alone. You're the alpha. If something happens to you in the Grey March, the pack is leaderless. Then the pack will have to survive one night without me. They have you. That's enough. Oren opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. He had been Calder's beta for 6 years. He knew the particular set of the alpha's jaw that meant debate was over. Instead, he asked the only question that mattered. What do I tell the council? Tell them I'm indisposed. And Renata? The name hit Calder like cold water. He had not thought of Renata since the moment Thisbe had spoken Sable's name. Hours ago, he had stood in Thornhall and elevated this woman to a position of honor in his pack. And now he couldn't summon a single thought about her that wasn't poisoned by the magnitude of what it had cost him. I don't care, Calder said, and meant it completely. He shifted. The transformation was fast and violent, muscle and bone reshaping with a crack that echoed off the stone walls. Where the alpha had stood, a massive black wolf now crouched, its gold eyes fixed on the eastern horizon. Oren stepped back. Bring her home. The wolf was already gone, moving like a shadow through the gate and into the dark, its nose to the ground, following a scent trail that lit up his senses like fire. Sable's scent. Lavender, wood smoke, ginger water. And beneath it all, something new. Something delicate and urgent and impossibly precious that he hadn't known before tonight but recognized instantly. The scent of his child. He ran. The Grey March at night was a maze of jagged ridgelines and narrow valleys choked with mist. The terrain was brutal. Loose shale gave way without warning, and the undergrowth was thick enough to slow even a wolf his size. But he didn't slow. He crashed through it with a recklessness that would have horrified Orin, driven by the bond in his chest that pulled him forward like a rope tied around his ribs. She was ahead of him. He could feel her through the bond, a faint pulse growing steadily stronger with every mile he closed. She was tired. He could feel that too, an echo of exhaustion that wasn't his own, filtering through the connection like water through cracks in stone. And beneath the exhaustion, something else. Grief. Deep and quiet and resigned. Not the sharp grief of shock, but the heavy, settled grief of someone who had already done their crying and come out the other side into something flatter and more permanent. The grief of a woman who had stopped hoping. It nearly broke his stride. He had done this. Every ounce of that grief was his creation. He had taken the one person in the world who trusted him completely and given her a front-row seat to her own erasure. He had held another woman's hand and smiled for the crowd and told himself it was strategy, told himself the end justified the means, told himself Sable would understand because she always understood. But understanding wasn't the same as enduring, and he had asked her to endure too much. The first light of dawn was seeping through the trees when he found the place where she had stopped to rest. A shallow overhang in the rock face, sheltered from the wind. The remnants of a small fire, carefully extinguished. The impression of her body in the soft earth where she had curled on her side. He shifted back to human form and crouched beside the cold ashes. He pressed his palm into the indent her body had left in the earth. It was still faintly warm. She was gone, already moving again. But she was close now. The bond hummed with proximity, and her scent trail was so fresh it burned. He pressed forward on foot through the narrowing valley, his bare feet silent on cold stone. And then he heard something else. A sound that stopped his heart. A scream. Sable had not planned to scream. She had planned to be brave and silent and efficient, the way she had been her entire life. Cross the Grey March, reach Coppervale, start over. Simple. But the ground had given way beneath her foot without warning, a section of trail that looked solid but wasn't. The shale crumbled, and her ankle twisted hard to the right, and the pain that shot up her leg was sharp enough to steal her breath. She went down. Her knees hit stone. Her palms scraped against loose rock, and the pack on her shoulders pitched forward, throwing her off balance. She caught herself before her stomach hit the ground, her arms locking straight, every instinct screaming to protect what was inside her. The scream escaped before she could stop it. Not from the ankle, from the terror. The blinding animal terror that the fall might have hurt the baby. She lay still for a moment, breathing hard, her forehead pressed against cold stone. Her ankle throbbed, her palms were bleeding, but beneath her ribs, she felt it, that tiny second heartbeat, faint and steady and unbothered by the chaos above. Still there, still safe. A sob of relief tore through her, and she pressed both hands against her stomach. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. I'll be more careful. I promise." She sat up slowly, hissing through her teeth as her ankle protested. It wasn't broken. She could tell from the way the pain moved, a bad sprain, swelling already beginning beneath the leather of her boot. She could treat it. She had the supplies in her pack, but walking on it would be slow and agonizing, and she had at least another day and a half of hard terrain ahead of her. Sable looked up at the sky. The dawn was coming in streaks of pale gold through the mist, and the valley walls rose steep and silent on either side of her. She was alone, completely, entirely, devastatingly alone. And for the first time since she had walked out of Thornhall, the full weight of what she had done settled over her. Not regret. She didn't regret leaving, but the enormity of it, the finality. She had left everything. The healing rooms that smelled like rosemary and certainty, Thisbe's steady hands and sharp wisdom, the only home she had ever known, such as it was. She had left it all. And she had done it because a man she loved had stood in a hall full of wolves and pretended she didn't exist. The tears came hot and fast, and this time she didn't try to stop them. "You're going to be fine," she told herself, but her voice came out thin and wavering. "You've been on your own before. Your whole life, really. This is just more of the same." But it wasn't the same, and she knew it. Because before, she hadn't known what it felt like to belong to someone. Before the bond, the loneliness had been a constant companion, so familiar she barely noticed it. Now, its absence had left a wound, and the wound had a name, and the name was Calder. She wiped her face and reached for her pack. The nausea tincture was in the side pocket. She took a careful sip and waited for it to settle. Then she pulled out the roll of linen bandage and began wrapping her ankle, her fingers trembling but precise. She was halfway through the second layer when the bond in her chest detonated. Not a pulse, not a tug. An explosion of warmth and urgency and raw, unfiltered emotion that slammed into her so hard she gasped. He was close. Impossibly close. Sable's head snapped up, her heart hammering. The valley stretched ahead of her, empty and still. The mist curled between the rocks. Nothing moved. And then, he was there. Calder emerged from the tree line at the edge of the valley, on foot, shirtless, barefoot, his chest heaving. His skin was scratched and dirty from the shift. His hair was wild. His eyes were red-rimmed and desperate and fixed on her with an intensity that stole every thought from her head. He stopped 10 feet away. His gaze dropped to her hands, still wrapped around her ankle, then to her bleeding palms, then to her face, tear-streaked and exhausted. Something broke in his expression. Not the controlled composure of an alpha, but the raw, unprotected face of a man seeing the damage he had caused. "Sable," he said, and her name in his mouth sounded like a prayer and an apology at the same time. "Don't." Her voice came out harder than she expected. She held up one bloodied hand. "Don't come any closer." He stopped. His hands hung at his sides, his fingers curling and uncurling like he was fighting his own body. "You're hurt," he said, and his voice shook. "I'm fine. Your ankle." "I said I'm fine." The silence between them was enormous. The mist drifted around them, and somewhere below, the stream churned over rocks. She could feel the bond surging, desperate to close the gap, her wolf clawing at her insides to go to him. She held herself still through sheer, stubborn will. "How did you find me?" she asked. "I followed the bond, and your scent." His throat worked. "Thisbe told me." Sable closed her eyes. "Of course she did." "Told you what?" "Everything." The word hung in the air between them, heavy and terrible and final. "So you know about the baby," she said flatly. She opened her eyes and watched his face. She wanted to see what it did to him. She wanted to know if it changed anything, or if this was just another complication for him to manage, another problem requiring a political solution. What she saw nearly undid her. Calder's composure shattered. Not slowly, not in stages, but all at once, like a window struck by a stone. His face crumpled, his eyes filled. His shoulders, broad enough to carry the weight of an entire pack, curved inward like he was trying to hold himself together and failing. "Yes," he whispered. "I know." He took one step toward her. She didn't stop him. He took another. His knees buckled and he dropped to the ground in front of her, kneeling on the cold stone like a man in prayer. "I'm sorry." His voice broke on the second word. "Sable, I'm so sorry. I did this. All of it. I told myself I was protecting you, protecting us, and all I did was destroy everything that mattered." "You chose her," Sable said, and her voice cracked despite every effort to hold it steady. "In front of everyone, you chose her. It wasn't a choice. It was a transaction, A political arrangement to secure the Grey March expansion. Renata means nothing to me. She has never meant anything to me. And what do I mean to you? Sable asked, and the question came out raw and exposed, stripped of every defense she had left. Because from where I was standing in that hall, surrounded by 300 wolves who don't even know my name, I meant nothing too. Calder flinched like she'd struck him. You are everything, he said. You are the only thing that has ever mattered. Then why didn't you look at me? Her voice rose, the composure shattering like his had. One look, Calder. That's all I needed. One look to tell me you hadn't forgotten I was there. But you couldn't even give me that. He had no answer. She watched him search for one, watched his mouth open and close, watched the devastation spread across his features like water across stone. Because I'm a coward, he said finally, and the admission cost him something she could feel through the bond. Because if I had looked at you, I wouldn't have been able to go through with it. And I had convinced myself that going through with it was the right thing to do. He looked down at his hands, scraped and dirty against the stone. I was wrong. I was wrong about everything. Sable stared at him. This man who commanded a pack of 300, who had fought border wars and faced down rival alphas, and never once bowed his head to anyone, kneeling on cold ground in front of her with tears on his face and nothing left to hide behind. Her wolf keened. The bond pulled so hard it ached. But the wound was still open, and she wasn't ready to let him close it. I don't know if I can forgive you, she said quietly. Calder nodded slowly. I know. And I'm not going back. Not to be your secret. Not to stand in crowded rooms and pretend I don't exist while another woman sits where I should be. I'm not asking you to go back to that. I would never ask you to go back to that. Then what are you asking? He looked up at her, and his eyes were stripped bare. No armor, no strategy, no carefully constructed mask of alpha composure. Just a man, terrified and broken and desperate. I'm asking you not to disappear, he said. Not yet. Give me the chance to fix what I've broken, not in secret, not behind closed doors. Publicly, for all to see. And if I can't fix it, if it's too late, then I'll walk you to wherever you're going myself and make sure you and our child are safe. I swear it. Sable searched his face for the lie, the political calculation, the careful maneuvering she had grown so tired of. She found nothing but raw, unguarded desperation. The morning light caught his face, and for one brief moment he looked exactly like the man who had whispered, "You," on the night the bond had ignited. She didn't answer. She wasn't ready to. But she didn't tell him to leave. He wrapped her ankle first. Neither of them spoke while he worked. Calder knelt on the cold stone and took the linen bandage from her hands with a gentleness that made her chest ache. His fingers, scarred and calloused and twice the size of hers, moved with surprising care. He unwound the loose wrapping she had started and began again, supporting her heel in one palm while the other wound the fabric in smooth, practiced layers. Sable watched his hands and tried not to feel what the bond was flooding through her. Relief. Anguish. A tenderness so fierce it bordered on pain. Too tight? He asked without looking up. No. He finished the wrap and rested her foot carefully on the ground. Then he sat back on his heels and looked at her, and the rawness in his face hadn't faded. If anything, it had deepened. The morning light was unkind to him. It showed every shadow beneath his eyes, every line carved by months of deception and sleepless politics. You need to eat, he said, and rest. The baby needs you to rest. The word baby in his mouth did something complicated to her heart. He said it like it was sacred, like it was the most important word he had ever spoken. I have food in my pack, she said. Then eat, please. She ate, dried venison and hard bread, washed down with ginger water. He sat across from her and didn't eat, didn't ask for anything, just watched her with that devastated, attentive expression like she might vanish if he looked away. "You need to eat too," she said. "I'm fine." "You ran through the Grey March all night in wolf form. You're not fine." He accepted the dried venison she held out without argument. They ate in silence, facing each other across 3 feet of cold stone, the bond humming between them like a wire pulled taut. "What happens now?" Sable asked when the silence had stretched long enough. Calder set down the strip of venison and met her eyes. "I go back to Ashenmoor. I stand before the Elder Council and I tell them the truth. All of it. They'll try to remove you. Let them try. Elder Voss will withdraw his support. The Grey March expansion dies. I don't care. Your pack is going hungry, Calder. You told me yourself. 3 bad winters. Shrinking hunting grounds. That expansion isn't vanity. People will starve." His jaw tightened. She watched the conflict move through him, the same impossible calculus that had driven every decision he had made for the past year. Pack survival versus personal truth. Duty versus love. The needs of 300 wolves versus the needs of one. "I'll find another way," he said. "I'll negotiate directly with the neighboring territories. I'll petition the High Council for emergency access to the Grey March lowlands. I'll do whatever it takes, but I won't do it at the cost of you. Not anymore." Sable studied him. She wanted to believe it. Every cell in her body wanted to believe it. The bond was practically screaming at her to close the distance between them and let him hold her. But wanting to believe and trusting were 2 different things. "You said give me time nearly a year ago," she said quietly. "You said you'd find a way. And tonight, you chose someone else in that same hall." The words hit him exactly where she aimed them. She watched him absorb the blow without defending himself. "I know," he said. "I know I've given you no reason to trust anything I say, but I'm not asking you to trust my words." He leaned forward slightly. "Come back. Watch what I do. And if my actions don't match what I'm telling you right now, then you walk away, and I won't follow. I'll help you disappear. I'll make sure you and the baby have everything you need. I swear it on the bond." Swearing on the bond was not a small thing. Among wolves, it was the heaviest oath that existed. A lie sworn on the bond would poison it, would turn the golden thread between them into something toxic and corrosive. No wolf made that promise lightly. Sable looked at him for a long time. The mist had thinned around them, and the valley was filling with pale morning light. She could hear birds now, the first tentative calls of dawn, and the stream below had softened from a roar to a murmur. "If I come back," she said slowly, "I don't come back as your secret. I walk into Ashenmoor beside you, through the front gate, in daylight." Something flickered in his eyes. Not hesitation, recognition, like he was seeing the woman he had fallen in love with, the one who had never once asked for less than she deserved until he had taught her to. "Through the front gate," he repeated, "in daylight, beside me. And Renata? I'll speak to her first, before we arrive. She deserves honesty, even if she was part of an arrangement." He paused. "She'll be furious. Her father will be worse." "I know." He held her gaze. "I don't care." Sable bit her lip. The bond thrummed. Her wolf pressed forward, urgent and aching. She held out her hand. Calder stared at it for a moment, like he was afraid it would disappear. Then he took it. His fingers closed around hers, warm and rough, and shaking slightly, and the bond between them flared so bright she felt it in her teeth. Neither of them let go. They reached Ashenmoor by late afternoon. Sable walked through the front gate beside Calder, her hand in his, her chin lifted, her borrowed cloak pushed back from her shoulders so every wolf they passed could see exactly who she was. Her ankle throbbed with every step, but she refused to limp. Not today. The stares began immediately. Wolves stopped mid-conversation, their heads turning, their nostrils flaring as they caught the scent of the alpha's bond on her skin. Whispers spread ahead of them like fire through dry grass. Calder didn't slow down. He walked through the central courtyard with the kind of deliberate, unhurried stride that said he was not hiding, and he was not ashamed, and anyone who had a problem with it could take it up with him directly. Oren met them at the entrance to the main hall. The beta's gaze dropped to their joined hands, then lifted to Calder's face. Something passed between them, silent and fast, and Oren nodded once. "The council has been assembled," Oren said. "Renata and Elder Voss are inside." Calder's grip on Sable's hand tightened fractionally. "Good." He turned to her. "You don't have to be in the room for this." "I want to be in the room for this." Another flicker, that same look of recognition, and then the ghost of something that might have been pride. "Stay beside me," he said. "That's the plan." They walked into the great hall together. The council chamber was smaller than Thornhall. A long stone room with a horseshoe table and tall windows that let in the late afternoon light. 8 elders sat around the table, their faces arranged in varying degrees of suspicion and surprise. Renata sat at the far end, her posture rigid, her dark eyes fixed on Sable with an intensity that could have cut glass. Elder Voss sat beside his daughter. He was a broad, silver-haired man with a face that looked like it had been carved from granite and had never once been used for smiling. His gaze moved from Sable to Calder to their joined hands, and his expression curdled. Calder released Sable's hand, not because he wanted to, but because what came next required him to stand as alpha, not as a man in love. "I've called this session to correct a grievous error," Calder began. "Mine." The room went still. "Last night I stood in Thornhall and announced Renata Voss as my companion. That announcement was a political arrangement designed to secure Elder Voss's support for the Grey March expansion. It was calculated, it was strategic, and it was a lie." Renata's face went pale. Elder Voss's went red. "Renata is not my mate," Calder continued, his voice steady and clear. "She has never been my mate. My true mate is Sable." He paused, letting the name settle over the room. "She has no surname because this pack never gave her one, so I am giving her mine. She has carried our bond for nearly a year, in secret, at my request, because I was too much of a coward to face this council with the truth." The silence was absolute. Sable could hear her own heartbeat, could hear the blood rushing in her ears. "She is not from a founding line," Calder said, and the words came out like a blade being laid on the table. "She has no family name, no political standing, no leverage that benefits this council. And I do not care. She is my mate. She is carrying my heir. And she will stand beside me, or I will step down." The eruption was instantaneous. Elder Voss surged to his feet, his chair scraping against stone. "This is an outrage. You made a commitment to my daughter, to this council. You cannot simply discard an alliance because some foundling has gotten herself pregnant." "Gotten herself pregnant," Sable repeated, her voice cutting through the chaos with a calm she did not feel. Every head in the room turned to her. "Is that how you think it works, Elder Voss?" A stunned beat of silence. Calder looked at her with an expression so full of love and awe it nearly buckled her knees. "The Grey March expansion is critical," another elder interjected, steering the conversation back to politics. "Without Voss's support, we don't have the votes. The pack will suffer." "The pack is already suffering," Calder replied. "But I won't build its future on a foundation of lies. There are other paths to the Grey March. Direct negotiation with the border territories, an appeal to the High Council. I'm prepared to pursue every one of them." "And if they fail?" Voss demanded. "Then I'll find another way. But I won't sacrifice my mate to buy your vote. That price is too high, and I should have known it from the start." Renata stood. The room fell silent again. She looked at Calder for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then her gaze shifted to Sable. "Did you know?" Renata asked, her voice quiet. "The whole time?" Sable met her eyes. "Yes." Renata's jaw tightened. Something moved behind her eyes, anger and humiliation and, buried beneath both, the faintest trace of relief. She had been a chess piece, too. She just hadn't known it. "You could have told me," Renata said to Calder. "You could have been honest instead of letting me believe I actually meant something to you." "You're right," Calder said. "And I'm sorry." Renata held his gaze for another moment. Then she turned and walked out of the council chamber without looking back. Elder Voss followed, his face thunderous, his threats trailing behind him like smoke. The remaining elders sat in heavy silence. Oren stood by the door, his arms folded, his expression giving nothing away. "Does anyone else wish to object?" Calder asked. No one spoke. Calder turned to Sable. The room was watching, every elder, every guard, every aide pressed against the walls. He crossed to her in 3 strides, took her face in both hands and pressed his forehead against hers. "No more secrets," he said quietly. "No more hiding. You and me. Out in the open. For good." Sable's eyes filled. She gripped his wrists and held on. "For good," she whispered back. Healing was not a straight line. The Elder Council fractured. Voss pulled his support, and the Grey March expansion stalled for months. Calder spent long nights in negotiation with border territories, trading concessions and favors with the kind of relentless patience that only a desperate alpha could sustain. It was grueling, ugly, political work, and it produced results, slowly. But it produced results. The first hunting parties crossed into the Grey March lowlands by late winter, and by spring, the pack's food stores were fuller than they had been in 3 years. Calder had found another way, just as he had promised. Renata never forgave him, and Sable didn't blame her. Some wounds weren't meant to heal clean. But the whispers about the foundling queen faded over time, replaced by quieter observations. That the alpha's mate had steady hands and knew how to treat a fever. That she ran the expanded healing rooms with Thisbe's precision and her own stubborn warmth. That the alpha, who had once been cold and calculating and impossible to read, now laughed in the corridors and smiled at council meetings and looked at his mate like she had rearranged the stars. Their daughter was born on a morning in early summer, red-faced and furious and perfect. Calder held her for the first time with hands that shook so badly Sable had to guide his arms into position. "She's so small," he whispered, terrified. "What if I break her?" "You won't break her," Sable said, exhausted and radiant, watching the most powerful alpha in the territory come completely undone over 7 pounds of screaming infant. He looked up at her, his daughter cradled against his chest, his eyes bright with tears. "Thank you," he said, "for not letting me lose you." Sable reached up and touched his face. "You almost did." "I know." His voice was rough, honest, stripped of pretense. "I'll spend the rest of my life making sure I never come that close again." She believed him, not because the words were pretty, but because every day for the past 9 months, his actions had matched them. Every single day. That night, the pack gathered in Thornhall, the same hall where he had once held the wrong woman's hand, the same hall where Sable had stood in the 3rd row and felt her heart crack down the center. Now she sat beside him at the head of the table, their daughter asleep in her arms, the bond between them humming steady and golden and warm. Calder looked at her across the firelight and she looked back, and neither of them needed to say a word. The hall was full of wolves, and every single one of them knew her name.